Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AI for Human Dignity conversations. And I'm truly honored to introduce our guest speaker, Arpana Agrawal, a global advocate for trustworthy and dignified AI. Arpana is an innovator, author, and leader whose work bridges AI, cybersecurity, ethics, and risk management to help organizations build systems that people can trust. And she's also a respected member of the Forbes Technology Council for Digital Health and serves as the chapter secretary for the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, bringing integrity and accountability to emerging technologies. And her groundbreaking framework, Dignity Ops and the Human Dignity Differential, are transforming how we convert ethical principles into measurable, audit ready controls across sectors such as healthcare, finance, and education. Please join me in welcoming today's keynote speaker, Arpana Agrawal. Welcome, Arpana.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to share my screen so we can share my slides. Give me
Sure.
1 second. I hope you guys can see my slides.
Yes.
Rupa, you can see that? Okay,
Yeah. Yes.
perfect, perfect. So I'm gonna give a quick opening for the stage. So again, hi everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me. I would like to start with a story that changed how I think about AI governance. 2 years ago, and as continue, I was conducting a security audit for a security healthcare system. During my review, I discovered their patient triage AI system had been making recommendations for 6 months without a single audit log, which is very critical. So no record of which patients were prioritized, no explanation when we inquired, and no way to verify if it was working correctly or failing catastrophically. When I asked the management about the oversight, they said the algorithm works. Our vendor, especially when we do third parties, is ethical. That phrase, the vendor assured us, kept me thinking. Because in my 13 years of auditing financial systems, cybersecurity infrastructure, and compliance frameworks, I've learned one unshakable truth. You cannot trust what you cannot verify. We would never accept the vendor assured us for financial controls. We would accept it for the data security. We would accept it for patient. We wouldn't. Let me rectify this. We wouldn't accept it for data security, and we wouldn't accept it for patient privacy. So why do we accept it for systems making life-altering decisions about people? Today, as AI rapidly, and I mean very rapidly, integrates into every facet of our lives, as mentioned in the industry of healthcare, finance, education, employment, public services as well, there is one question that we always ask. Can we trust the systems to uphold the dignity, rights, and the values of people they're meant to serve? For me, human dignity is not a philosophical concept. It's a governance requirement that must be implemented, measured, and independently verified, just like every other critical control in our organization or even outside. I would like to firstly show the agenda that I would like to cover. Sorry. There we go. So this is the couple of items that I will be talking in that order. One would be the problem, why dignity must be a controlled domain. What is the dignity ops? Dignity framework that's developed and how it has worked and and how it will be implemented. And some of the case studies that we can talk about. Ownership, I thought that deserved a separate slide on its own, and we'll talk about it later, how this plays a key critical role. And lastly, to sum up what we learned. Let's talk about the problem first. Today, we're facing a technology crisis, which we see in every component and every aspect. We're facing what I call an operational ethics deficit. Here's what I mean. Walking into an organization, deploying AI, and asking to see any bias testing protocols, their model audit trails, their fairness matrices that they use, their dignity impact assessments that we in today's world, we call it risk assessments. Most can't produce them. They actually don't even have that. Not because they don't care, but because these controls don't exist in their governance frameworks yet. And what I mean by yet, we're down, it's been a couple of years now since AI has come in picture. We're still playing catch up with the governance piece. Instead, what you'll find are beautiful AI ethics statements on websites, principles about fairness and transparency with different definitions, committees to responsible AI, but no standardized, testable, audit-ready controls. As someone who spent decades in IT audit, compliance, cybersecurity, and again, fraud examination, I can say principles without controls are just wishes and big promises. We see the consequences everywhere. We have real life case studies that we've seen that. AI systems making opaque decisions that affect people's lives. Bias perpetuates inequality across demographics. Automated systems stripping away human autonomy. Organizations unable to explain why their AI made specific decisions and how they reached to that outcomes, which now widens the trust gap between institutions and the public, in some cases, customers, health patient data. Again, these aren't technical failures, they're governance failures, because that's where it all starts from. Here's the truth. Governance failures don't fix the problems. In my experience, auditing everything from financial fraud to cybersecurity breaches, I've learned that when controls are missing, harm is definitely inevitable. That's why I, with a help, developed a framework to change this, to make dignity as measurable and governance as security, privacy, or financial integrating. So now moving on to the second slide. There we go. Why dignity must, and must become a control domain. Let me tell you why I was able to solve this problem. Firstly, as an IT auditor and at playing different roles within my career, I've reviewed thousands of systems. When I audit financial status, financial systems, as an example, I can trace every transaction. When I audit access controls, coming to security, I can verify every permission. But what about AI systems? Too often, there's nothing to audit. No logs, no testing records, no evidence trail. As a compliance officer, I've navigated HIPAA, SOC 2, ISO 27701, GDPR, EUI. I've watched organizations spend millions of beautiful AI ethic policies that mean nothing without enforcement mechanisms. As a cybersecurity professional as well, I know every system is vulnerable until proven otherwise. AI introduces entirely a new attack surfaces. For example, we have seen data poisoning, model manipulation, adversely attacks. These are subtle, persistent, and nearly impossible to detect without proper monitoring. Real-time proper monitoring. Again, as a fraud examiner, I've seen how small control failures cascades into massive harm. AI amplifies this exponentially. One biased algorithm perpetuates discrimination across millions of decisions before anyone notices. That will definitely be demonstrated in one of our case studies. Lastly, as an AI ethics practitioner that we play the role, I know good intentions don't prevent bad outcomes. We need enforceable standards, measurable outcomes, and independent verification. Also to add written policies and procedures that can be followed when evaluating for AI ethics in any algorithms or decisions that have been made. So this combination, audit, compliance, security risk, ethics, give me a unique lens because that gives me a wide variety of experience. I don't just think about AI should do, I think about how to prove it's doing it, how to test for failures, and how to respond when things go wrong. Now let's move to the dignity of what it is all about. I'm gonna kind of zoom in. There we go. So here's the core insights that drive the work. Human dignity must be treated as a control domain. Again, control domain is the keyword. Just like any security, privacy, or financial integrity. So let's break it down with a comparison that you'll be able to recognize, because that's what we do in our daily work. When we secure a system, we don't just say we value security. We implement one, access controls, encryption standards, segregation of duties, change management, continuous monitoring. All these are the current controls that are in place for security, as we've seen. Then we test these controls. We collect evidence. We conduct audits. We generate metrics for the outcomes. We produce reports that the boards and regulatories can actually use. Why don't we do the same for dignity? When dignity is missing from an AI system, harm is not theoretical, it's measurable. And the key here is measurable. We need to be able to measure. People lose jobs, patients receive wrong treatments, families are falsely accused of fraud. We've seen that again. Communities face system discrimination. So dignity must have the same rigor approach we apply for security and for security. So for example, autonomy controls, ensuring humans retain meaningful choices, bias controls, testing for fairness across demographics, transparency controls, making decisions explainable, again, what and how the results are being produced and what is being used. Accountability accounts, clear ownership when things fail. That is very important. Continuous monitoring, tracking dignity matrix over time, in real time, I would say. Independent audits, third-party verifications that controls work. This isn't just aspiration, and it does sound like aspiration when we walk into any audit. This should be operational, and this should be happening right away. And to operation this, I developed a Dignity Ops, an audit-aligned framework that translates ethical principles into testable control objectives. And I want to show how, since these were the objectives, I want to touch base on how this ops, a high level of what the Dignity Ops framework is. So Dignity Ops has 5 components. Think of it as a complete governance lifecycle for AI dignity. 1 is defining the problem, context audit plus context audit. So when deploying an AI system, we conduct a structured review to understand what is the purpose of the system, who benefits it, who might be harmed, what were the customers, what are the dignity risks, always, what are the risks, including dignity risks. Giving an example would be a loan approval AI. Dignity risk includes discriminatory lending patterns, lack of explanation for denials, no appeal process, loss of human judgment in edge cases. This becomes your audit baseline. So that would be the starting point of all the testing. The second component, dignity risk, which is very important. This is where the risk assessment plays a role. We use a standardized classification system like CVE for security vulnerabilities. But for dignity risk, just to mention some of them, as well, and listed more of them in the slide, bias and unfair outcomes. Again, demographic disparities in treatment. What exactly is being subjected to the testing, and what components are there? What's the full list? Again, classification in the risk assessment process. Loss of autonomy, decisions made with meaningful human input. Again, that's where we say we need human judgment, human in the loop. Inadequate transparency, inability to explain or challenge decisions. We should be able to always challenge the algorithms and the outcomes and the decisions that are being made by the AI system. Each risk gets a severity rating. For example, just like security vulnerabilities, critical, high, medium, and low. We've seen that in risk assessments. When we do AI systems, data classifications, we always rank our risks, and that's how it should be in this framework as well. There are 25 audit-ready controls that I have developed, but I will mention very few of them due to the time. This is the heart of Dignity Ops. governance control objectives. Each criteria from the 25 are defined in four of these objectives. So one was the clear control. One is the evidence requirements, testing procedures, and acceptance criteria. I will take two of the controls and describe how it works. So I named this as DOC 06, which is bias testing frequencies. So what would be the control objective of this? This would be all AI models are tested for demographic biases. And you would also say what the period time would. IROD quarterly, because that's what I think it should be done. Evidence required. This is very key. What evidence are you collecting? What reports are you verifying, right, for your impact analysis? Testing procedures. Auditors reviews testing methodologies, sample sizes, confirms significance, statistically significances. That is very important. What sample size are you choosing, right? How biased and what type of judgment did you use on the testing methodologies? Acceptance criteria. No demographic group shows 10% adverse impact without document justification. Again, if there is a document deficiency, which we see in quite a lot of cases, right? We need to call it out and see why is this considered as a bias and how it need to be rectified. I picked two. So the second one was DOC 21, which I thought again was human oversight escalation patterns. If you notice, the framework composes of a lot of human in the loop, human interferences and how human should react and what duties human should perform. It's not always only on the AI systems. So coming back to the 21, human oversight escalation paths. Control objective. Clear procedures exist for humans to review and override any AI decisions, which is very important. We have seen the decisions or in the systems that are overridden without permissions or without proper paper trail. So this is a very important part because you should be able to trace it back. Evidence required. Documented escalation procedures, logs. That is very key, which we don't see enough in our audits, is logs of overrides, logs of interventions, logs of actions that have been taken. So analysis of override patterns, testing procedures. Again, test escalation processes, understand where it's documented, how did they follow it? Verify response times, check that overrides are actually implemented. We have an acceptance criteria on how are you accepting it? What is the criteria that you're using? Where is it documented that you're accepting it based on this abnormal conditions? Again, the fourth one I want to talk about is the matrices, performance indicators. This is very important. Everything should be measurable, right? So you can't manage what you don't measure. It's basically you can't test what you can't see. So in Dignity Ops, I included specific matrices, such as transparency score, which are percentage of decisions with adequate explanations. Fairness delta, we always have to include that, is statistically differences in outcomes across the different demographics. Autonomy preservation rate, percentage of decisions with meaningful human involvement, again, input. Override utilization, how often humans intervene and why, which it becomes a very important part. If I would say the more frequent there is an override, meaning overlooking over the decisions, human intervene becomes a key important part. Again, that's where the root cause analysis is where it's performed. Trust indicators, user satisfaction, complaint rates, appeal success rates. We've always had like patients complaining, patient data feedbacks that we get, survey feedbacks. That should definitely be included because then you can identify the gaps that happen. We've always used the fifth component, which is the continuous monitoring and independent verification, not even as auditor, but also as any, I would say, advisory role or consultant role. There should always be an independent verification, not relying on what's being produced and provided to you. And again, real-time monitoring, which I can never stop emphasizing how important that becomes. So we have, in this component, this section 5, we've integrated items like in the existing governance. You could do internal audit cycles, risk management committees, that which people are involved in overlooking at that process, quality assurance processes, regulatory compliance programs, again, third-party assessments. The reason we talk about third-party assessments is that we don't want to be just dependently relying on third-party assessments. We should be performing independent verification. Overall, the goal is to make dignity governance business as usual, not a special project. It should be in your daily routine, and it should be constantly not a check in the box. I would like to kind of incorporate this dignity ops and see what lacked in two real life case studies that has happened in the industry. So first one, we see education, right? What happened in YouTube's recommendation algorithm repeated pushed children towards addictive, inappropriate, or misleading content. We've seen that so many times, which still happens, right? That the kids are watching the same content or from the same cartoons again because that's what keeps coming and prompting up. The system was optimized for engagement, not well-being. International reports documented harm to million young users. That was what happened in that YouTube algorithm case. What went wrong from a control perspective, break it down, was no special protections for vulnerability population. The population that was sampled was children. What was the optimization goal they used? They used watch time because that's what they were seeing, how long the kids were on YouTube. Misaligned with dignity, the content that was being used. No transparency of why specific videos were recommended. Limited parental control mechanism. Again, when kids use the YouTube, they're just on their iPads and they're just constantly using. There's no being on what's being seen or what the kid's watching. So no independent oversight of algorithm behaviors with minors. YouTube was not able to provide those behavior analysis. At a governance perspective, when your users, such as children's, standard controls aren't enough. You need enhancement protections, mandatory human review of content patterns, transparencies, requirements for parents. In terms of requirements, I would say approval of the parents as well. Opt-out mechanisms that actually work. This is all part of what's being data collected from YouTube and then pushing the children to, to view this content. As mentioned, DOC 22, one of the controls that the audit-related controls that are part of Dignity Ops would require systems affecting vulnerable populations must implement enhanced oversight, transparency, and autonomy protection appropriate to the population's needs. It's like whatever your algorithm inputs, that's being analyzed, and then that's what's been output. So there should be more transparency. There should be more visibility on the logs on how are you determining this. The second case study, hand in hand, I would like to talk about it. Both the case studies that I used, it was more related to the society than what we see in a healthcare and financial industry, because we've heard of them quite a lot in our careers. So I want to touch base of the employment, the AI hiring tools and systematic discrimination. We've seen that in an Amazon case as well. What happened was multiple employers across the US and Europe and other regions as well deployed resume screening, an interview analysis tool that systematically penalized sometimes women for different career gaps, ages, older applicants, people with disabilities, candidates with accents or non-standard speech patterns. Some were caught through journalist reviews or research investigated. Others still may be used because depending on the data they use for training, and that's how the algorithm has been built. Again, what went wrong from the compliance perspective, the governance perspective? Just as I mentioned, training data is historical. How often do you even update your data? Where is the source of data coming from? How are you producing, let's say, dummy data? So no independent fairness validation before deployment. Is there any validation check that we're doing? No documentation of where the AI was actually measuring. What was it actually measuring? Where are the logs? What was being produced? How was the algorithm supposed to work and how did it not work? So no appeal mechanism for rejecting candidates. There is no evidence that shows how to be, approve and why did they get rejected, those candidates? Because you have to produce outcomes on your results. Again, no regular auditing on hiring outcomes by demographics. That's the first question that I've started to ask in my current audits with AI. How frequent are you updating your training data? Where are you getting your source data from? What is the source from? What is there a list of the demographics that you're including, that you're feeding in the algorithm? All sorts of such questions are really benefit during the audits that we perform. That a control that I thought could, from the Dignity Ops, which was Doc 5 data provenance, requires document source, composition, and known biases of all training. If historical data reflects discriminatory patterns, implement specific mitigation for model training. This is one of the controls that audit-related controls that I have included in the framework. So this control forces the question, which I ask in every audit, is if the training on past hiring decisions or company has a history of underrepresenting women in leadership, for example, won't the AI learn to continue that pattern? Of course. We have seen that with ChatGPT. When we try to keep feeding certain information, it will produce you your desired result because that's what the data you had been providing to ChatGPT, and that's what came through. Moving on very closely, and I thought this section deserved on a slide on its own, but we'll touch on it just for a few minutes, is ownership. Again, in audits, we always ask the roles and responsibility. We always say in our policies and procedures or SOPs, right? Who is responsible? Who owns the process? And you will be so surprised. There is no one sole responsible. And sometimes there is no clear ownership. And it happens so frequent in like bigger organizations that we think that should have a clear ownership or a clear structure, I must say. So in my experience, and this is what I suggest, successful implementation requires a very accountable, clear ownership on and clearly drafted on policies and procedures, starting from the STO or CIO, what the role would be, like technical implementation, tool integration. That also includes when you're approving a tool, which is an AI tool, there's a chief risk officer. This is very critical. We talk about risk assessments. We talk about identifying data classifications. This is exactly where the approval comes from, the risk classification and monitoring. Compliance officer, chief compliance, we need that in most, or I would say every committee, because they're the ones who do policy development and regulatory alignment, and they're also independent. Internal audit, our favorite, independent testing and verifications. We come in and do testings and make sure everything is working and there is no biases and there is transparency. That all will be reflected in the security controls that we have in our audits. So security controls and threat monitoring. This, in conjunction to that, they would also incorporate the real-time monitoring that I keep mentioning that is a very critical part. Chief Ethics Officers or AI Governance Board. This is a new one. We've seen a lot of companies that have already implemented that, and there are so many that are still in the process of it. I would say the immature process, but again, it becomes very critical when you do that, that you have an independent ethical officer that whose oversight has an oversight and is reviewing those policies, documents, and speaking and being in the committee of those discussions. I've covered quite a lot of ground, but I believe these are the key important parts that we should keep in our mind moving forward. One thing I do want to mention before I do a closing is that ethics controls risk mitigation. All these items are not just left for an internal audit or a compliance officer or an advisory to just come in and look over. These are the things as we speak and we try to work with AI systems should be in everybody's back of the mind because that's how we will strive. That's how we will proceed further in our roles and in how we should design the systems. Because when you come to audits and when it comes to compliances, all these will be asked. All the questions will be, all these questions will be asked in an audit. Well, matter of fact, I'm doing one of the audits as well. And we are asking all these questions. And we're also at demanding for paper trails, policies, and procedures. And where is there roles and responsibilities that we can look back? So, not to take too much, I would like to close out the presentation with some key takeaways. We're at a critical juncture. That is very true because with the whole AI advancements, here's what I need everybody to understand. From years of conducting audits, investigation and fraud, managing cyber incidents, and enforcing compliance, I can tell you with absolute certainty, governance failures do not fix them alone. So it's not governance, not alone will fix this. They will require leadership commitment, investment, accountability, transparency, and continuous improvement in terms of real-time monitoring. The three specific actions that we should immediately take as we speak. Always demand for audit trails so you can view the accountabilities. Establish dignity matrices so you should be able to measure on what's being tested. Require independent validation. Let me bring this back to where it started. That healthcare system I audit, the one with no oversight of its triage AI. After I presented the findings, the management said that I'll never forget that I generally thought that we are doing the right thing. We bought the best system. We followed the vendor guidelines. We trusted the technology. Again, trusted technology. Trust is not something you grant. So, trust, in my words, is something you verify. As we accelerate into the next decade and the next minute of AI, we face a fundamental choice. Do we treat AI dignity as a nice to have philosophical decision, or do we treat it as a governance imperative with the same rigor we apply to financial controls, security protocols, and safety standards? I've spent my career building frameworks, and that make trust measurable. That turn ethical principles into operational controls. That then further assures systems serve people rather than endanger them. Again, working in a healthcare industry myself, it becomes very critical that the systems serve people rather than endanger them. So the systems we audit today will become either the guardians or the threats of tomorrow very easily. So adapting these controls, testing the systems, measuring dignity outcomes, hold vendors accountable, demand evidences. I love this one. Demand evidences, not promises, not go by face value or words when you do inquiries. Because trust is not a feature, we can patch it later. It must be architect from the foundation. Foundation meaning governance, starting from the governance to the top down. Thank you so much. And I will open the floor for any questions. And I will stop sharing my screen. Rupa?
Yes, amazing. Thank you so much, Arpana, for an amazing session. And for delivering such a powerful and necessary session today, and the way you walked us through the dignity ops framework, and from autonomy and bias controls to transparency monitoring and independent validations, highlights exactly why dignity must be treated as governance requirement and not just a value statement. So, and to everyone here, thank you for showing up with openness, curiosity, and courage. And these conversations matter because the system we build today will shape human lives at scale tomorrow. So, as we close, I'd like to leave you with a few grounding questions, the kind that guide my own work and that today's session reinforced. So, can your AI decisions be traced, explained, and defended? Are your fairness and autonomy matrix visible, measurable, and monitored? And most importantly, is dignity treated as a control domain or just as an ethical aspiration? So please answer these questions. And Arpana, thank you once again for your expertise and your passion. And thank you everyone for being a part of this community. And we genuinely care about doing this right and looking forward to continuing this journey together. Thank you so much.